to Trusty Chords, the podcast which aims to celebrate music and those that create it. By his own admission, James Curd isn't exactly a household name. However, the chances are pretty good that you've been exposed to his work at some point over the years. Having launched his musical career back in Chicago in the 90s, James rose to fame as part of the group Greenskeepers, which managed to find a bit of widespread fame thanks to songs like Lotion. If you found yourself listening to Triple J back in 2004, then the Silence of the Lambs inspired Lotion is one that you probably remember very well. Don't believe me? Go check it out. I'll wait right here. See, it's great, isn't it? But apart from that, James is pretty prolific. See, he's made plenty of music for the Grand Theft Auto series as well. I'm going to guess you might have heard of that one. But it doesn't end there either, because in addition to scoring other projects, his name can be found as part of other musical endeavours as well, including Favoured Nations, Tone Brigade and Holy Models. Additionally, he's also part of Modern Living, which is something of a full circle moment given that the other half of the band is the Greenskeepers Mark Share. Together, they've been making plenty of amazing music, working with names like Josh Pike, Geordie James from San Cisco, Drama, Nick Littlemore and more, to craft something that I think you really need to hear. These days, James is still a globe-trotting musician, though he's based in Adelaide, South Australia, meaning that all these Australian collaborations are making a lot more sense. James was kind enough to join me for the podcast this week, and I can't thank him enough for taking the time. So I strongly urge you to check out Modern Living's new material, bump some classic Greenskeepers gear, and once you're done giving that a spin, have a listen to our chat, and I'll see you at the end of the episode for some general housekeeping. James Curd, thank you very much for joining this episode of the Trusty Chords podcast.
Thanks you for having me.
So for those who might not recognize your name, do you think you could give me a quick few words on, I guess, who you are and why you think we might be chatting today?
Well, I'm from Chicago, and I used to have a project called Greenskeepers that brought me to Australia a lot. We had like a song in the Hottest 100, and I used to come out here and DJ a bunch, and we had our band project, and then I moved here, and that's why a lot of people in Australia might know me. I also make a lot of the music for Grand Theft Auto, but I don't know that anyone knows that, like, follows me exactly for that reason, so.
Yeah, because for a second, just when you said, I don't know if anyone knows that, I'm like, yeah, it's a bit of a startup, this whole Grand Theft Auto thing. No one's really, across it yet.
No, I mean, like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
of course, yeah.
When people think about me, if they know my music at all, which isn't very many people to begin with, I think they'd mostly know Greenskeepers.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, those are all definitely things that we will touch on, I guess. But I guess with these podcasts, what I love to do is sort of go back in time to where a love of music first formed. So for you, James, do you have a recollection of your earliest memory of when music first resonated with you?
Yeah, I had two older sisters, so in a bit much older. So when I was 6, 7, 8, they were already 16, 17, 18, and so it was right around the time of Prince and Madonna and WBMX in Chicago. So my oldest sister Lisa would play this radio station all night long, and it had like Hot Mix 5, like Frankie Knuckles and Scott Smokin' Sills and those guys, and it was just kind of my first introduction to dance music and in that kind of music. And I remember running around the basement like a madman, just like really into that music.
You're right. Right. So then, I mean, I'm assuming that it was like those sort of artists that sort of led to you really sort of, I guess, enjoying the possibilities of what music could offer you.
Well, I think it was interesting because I think that, for such a young kid to have such older sisters that, while my other friends were listening to more, children's music, I was already listening to that, the more popular stuff. And, from that zone, I moved into skateboarding, and that's when I really got into like punk and Fugazi and Palehead and that type of music. The Cure and Violent Femmes. And I used to go to the skate park and listen to that type of music. Beastie Boys was big back then. Um, and so that was like so I was listening to what my sisters listened to pop wise. Then as I got into my own, identity, I've gravitated towards more of the, skateboarding era of music. And then I used to go to a club in Chicago. You had to be, well, so Chicago has like a curfew, so you have to be, if you're 17 and over, you can stay out all night long. Like you don't have to, you're not in trouble with the police. So when I was 14, I used to have friends that worked at the YMCA, and I made a fake YMCA card that said I was 17. And I used to go to this club called Medusa's. And the only reason I wanted to go there wasn't necessarily for the music, it was because they had a half pipe in it. And they used to let the kids skate the half pipe for free and give them, drinks, Coke and stuff. Uh, and because I think they like the visual aspect of just like, there's a club going on and there's some skateboarders on this half pipe. It was raised up, so you're kind of above the crowd. And that's when I started hearing house music. So then I really transitioned into, loving the music that I was hearing at that club. And yeah, the rest is kind of history. Worked a terrible summer job, saved up money, bought some turntables, learned how to DJ, and used that money from DJing to buy my first MPC 2000 and started making music. And yeah, that was.
Right. So it's so basically this whole like playing music game basically came from a counterfeit YMCA card, really.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
did.
Okay. Well, there you go, kids. I guess counterfeiting pays off. No, not quite. But that was actually going to be my next question, though. Not counterfeiting, but how did this love of music transform into playing music? So I guess hearing this sort of house music, that was something that you sort of like heard and said, "Hey, this is something I want to do."
Yeah, in that time, right? Like, so in Chicago, I'm 17 years old. I'm in the South Side in some warehouse that some kids have paid off the police and paid the owner to let us have a party there. And you would just walk in there and you knew that you were at the best thing happening in Chicago that night, and quite possibly actually, you know, the world, because it was a dirty warehouse, but it was like white, black, Puerto Rican, gay, straight. There was, drag queens and trans, and it was just so long ago, but you just knew you were in such a melting pot of people in creating that culture. And it was all based around the love of music and fashion and so I needed to be a part of that. I wanted to contribute somehow, and music and DJing was kind of what my entry point into that was.
Right. So was that then a little bit of a, I guess I was to say a little bit of a career move? You wasn't really a musical career by that point, but having gone from someone who was skateboarding, listening to bands like Fugazi and all that sort of thing, like did any of your friends sort of like say, "Hey, why are you now sort of transitioning to this sort of different style of music?" Which I guess, at least from my own experiences, like house music was almost seen as like the enemy of like this sort of skate music and stuff like that. Was
Totally.
was there was there any sort of, I guess, some friction or tension between the two?
Um, I had a couple friends that were kind of like not impressed with what I was interested in, and if we were driving around from one skate spot to the other skate spot, we weren't listening to my mixtape. We were listening to theirs, and but a whole crew of other friends love, like, if I had a DJ at a party,
Mm.
and they couldn't get enough of that. They knew that I was onto something good when they went and felt that environment and then that vibe.
Yeah, right. So then
So,
those early days was that when you were sort of going by, what was the name you going by, Jiminy Cricket around that time?
oh gosh, yeah, that is that. Yeah,
Yeah.
someone gave me that name.
Yeah,
Uh,
right.
that's a really funny story. Is I I was maybe 15, 16 years old, and they had this party at a ski resort that was closed down for the summer. And it was a 3-day camping rave, just, totally unlicensed event. And it was actually the first place that Daft Punk ever played in America.
Yeah, wow.
And so it went for 3 days. And from 6 p.m. till 5 in the morning, they had a schedule of DJs. You know, from all around the Midwest and some from international and stuff like that. And but from like 6 in the morning till 5 p.m., they had these tents up and running with no real DJ schedule, and they had like a whiteboard that you could walk up and be like, okay, I want to DJ from 3 to 4 or whatever. And I heard about that, so I brought an actual milk crate of records, and I ran up to the first tent, after we parked, and I asked the guy, I was like, hey, like, what do I have to do to DJ? And he's like, dude, I've had to use the toilet for like 30 minutes. You're on, like, next record. Like, can you just start now? And there wasn't many people there. There was only like 50 people in that tent. And there was this song that was really just came out and was becoming a kind of a cult record for Chicago by Romanthony, called The Wanderer. And he's the one that sang, music sounds better with you and stuff like that. And
Yeah, I was gonna say he was involved with Daft Punk as well,
yeah,
wasn't
he
he? But
was,
then you said
oh, yeah,
Stardust and
definitely.
everything, so yeah,
One more time, yeah.
yeah, of course.
And and it's got this really interesting intro as well, that song in particular. So I put it on, and my tent went from 50 people. By the time I was in the middle of that first song, it went to like 350 people. It packed out. And that was my first DJing experience in front of anybody. And so I played for an hour, and when I got off, I had all these interesting people ask me, "Can you come DJ in St. Louis? Hey, we'd love to have you in Indianapolis." And I do a club night in Chicago, and so that was my kind of became an actual working DJ.
Oh, wow. So then when did Greenskeepers form? Because that was around the late 90s, I think I've placed it. Is that
Yep,
correct?
yep, yeah, like about 1997, 98.
Yeah, right.
90, yeah, around then. Um, so I was working on music on my own, and I had a friend that I skateboarded with who was very open to that culture and the music. And so one night, him and I were in my studio, and he sang. I mean, this is back when I recorded to a DAT tape.
Mm.
So I had a beat going, and he played some guitar that I pitched down to sound like a bass. And I hit record on the DAT machine and hit play on the MPC, and he just grabbed the microphone and just did this like 3-4 minute free verse, just like off the top of his head. And so I had it on this DAT tape, and a few weeks later, I sent some music to Classic, which is a record label out in London. They're pretty popular now. They're doing like all Honey Dijon's music, and but it was Derek Carter's record label back then.
Mhm.
And I submitted these 3 or 4 songs, and I forgot that kind of joke song was at the end of the well, not a joke, but just like that pretty creative song was at the end of the DAT. And they called me back. They're like, we love this song. Like, can we put that out? So that became a song called Should I Sing Like This? And up
Right.
until that
Okay.
point, I was releasing music on my own as Greenskeepers, and then Greenskeepers became Nick and I. And this is a long, crazy kind of winding thing. And then Nick moved to Germany, so I was back to working on my own. And because of the success of some of the Greenskeepers stuff that I did on my own and did with Nick, I got a remix to do for The Incredibles, like that movie that
Oh
came
yeah,
out.
right.
And and there was this guy who's a really talented producer and musician, named Mark Share, who did a lot of work for the record store that I worked at, doing like graphic design and stuff. And when the Incredibles people sent me the files to remix, it was this crazy, like, 2 CDs, 6 gig of samples to work with. And I was used to working out with my MPC that had like 250 megabytes of memory or something,
A little bit different, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, totally different. So I was like, man, I need some help. So I asked Mark if I could come into his studio and kind of separate these samples and figure out what to do with them, because he worked in Logic. Like, I pretty much think Logic like one, number one version of it. And then we had such a good time working together on that. I was like, well, you might as well be part of this project if you want. And so he was in Greenskeepers from that point.
Wow.
And then Nick ended up coming back from Germany a few years later. So the band has gone from, me on my own, me and Nick, four of us, back to just me and Mark. And yeah, so now Mark and I are actually back to working together.
which is something I'm definitely going to touch on in a minute as well. But I guess, Greenskeepers became sort of, I guess, known in Australia for the one song Lotion, which was a
Yeah.
little bit of a surprising song, I guess, especially because it feels like it's not entirely representative of your sound, if you know what I'm sort of getting at there. Like,
Yeah.
like I feel as though if anyone was to sort of listen to the James Curd sound, they're not going to sort of say, oh, yeah, Lotion is exactly it. But it
Yeah.
was, I guess, it's a nice little foothold into a market like Australia as well, because it's a very, I don't, it's a song I've loved for about 20 years or so, and it's one I always come back to, and I just think it's such a it's a song which feels better than it should be. You know what I mean? Like if you write it down on paper, you just think this sounds ridiculous, but it works so well. But I guess how does something like that feel? Like, is it a bit of a double-edged sword to have a track like that do well, but to have people resonate with something that sort of isn't you in your purest form? And I don't mean that in a sort of
I don't know.
derogatory way at all, of course.
I think it's been a really good thing about my, music career, and also maybe part of what makes my career a bit more difficult to, be recognized in a more broader sense. Um, like I told you, I grew up listening to Fugazi and the punk
Mm,
stuff, and when I transitioned from making just straight up house music on an MPC, working with people like Mark, who's such a great musician, opened the door to having a broader range of music that I could actually be a part of and make.
mm,
So, the album that Lotion is on, Pleach, has house music. It's got some really pretty kind of jazz, funk stuff, and Lotion is arguably kind of like a rock song, like an indie rock song. So I I don't it doesn't bother me at all, and I'm proud of that music, and I'm kind of proud of all the different things I do, and I think it's also kind of an interesting thing that people would be like, oh, I'm into Greenskeepers because of Lotion, and then like, what the hell? Like they did some music with Derek Carter and Honey Dijon. You know what I'm saying? Like it's kind
yeah.
of I'm not. I've got so much ADHD as a creative person that I couldn't imagine sitting in my studio week after week making the same kind of music. That's not
Mm.
really inspiring or challenging, you know?
Oh, I totally understand. I mean, for me, when I listened, because the first thing I would have heard obviously was Lotion, and then I did listen to the rest of the album, and I remember thinking, this is different. But you know what? I don't hate it. And for me, it was a real gateway drug. You know what I mean? Sort of like being able to sort of say, oh, okay, there is a lot of diversity in what musicians can do, and this is a great example of it. I feel, and to me, that's something I love about artists who aren't confined to one specific box or one specific genre, and that's something I really do enjoy about your music. But of
Thanks.
course, this isn't me just here to heap praise upon you for however long we're chatting. And of course, I don't want to make this a Greenskeepers podcast in its entirety, but do you find it also surprising there is still a lot of popularity for this project? Because I mean, there's still people listening to things like Vagabond and Lotion all the time, all these years later.
I think it's nice because it captured that moment in time. Every time I come into the studio, I feel like, if I started at 8 p.m., the song would be different than if I started at 10 p.m. Like everything that you kind of do, it's kind of out of your hands, isn't it? And
Mm,
those songs, I feel like it's nice that they captured that era, and it's nice that people are still, can kind of revisit it here and there.
totally. Now, you also mentioned before that some of the success of Greenskeepers brought you to Australia. So I'm trying to remember. You're still based in Australia, correct?
Yeah, I'm in Adelaide.
That's actually I'm originally from Adelaide myself,
Oh,
actually. So
nice.
yeah, because
I
and
love it.
yeah, it's a really lovely place for music as well. And I guess that was actually a question I was going to ask. Is I obviously don't want to disparage Australia or the Adelaide music scene, but there would have to be a lot of traveling involved, right? The options and opportunities in Adelaide and Australia are presumably lesser than you could find in the US and Europe, for example. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yeah, 100%. I just had to, as I don't really get to DJ that often in Australia. And then like 2 weeks ago, I had to sit on a plane for 24 hours of DJ, and Mexico City and Tulum and Mexico City again. Like, uh, yeah, that's the one thing. My daily grind. I have a beautiful house. I built a studio in the backyard. My bubble of my life. I barely have to move more than 2 or 3 miles away from my dentist, my doctor, the movie theater we go to. Everything is like so nice and so easy in Australia and where I live in Adelaide. But some of the culture and work for me is definitely still mostly in overseas.
Mm. No, I definitely understand that, and I'm also very, very aware of how grueling that traveling can be.
Yeah.
Because despite me being from Adelaide, my wife is from America,
Oh,
so
nice.
yeah, we had that sort of thing where if we're ever seeing her family, for example, it's all right, got to get on a plane, and you start realizing, wow, Australia is such a long way away from these, larger, whether they be tourist locations or music centers.
Where's your wife
Um,
from in America?
she's from Oklahoma.
Okay.
So, which is possibly why we sort of connected because we're both from those sort of states, which are often overlooked in favor of nearby states. Everyone overlooks Adelaide for
Yeah.
Melbourne, and everyone overlooks Oklahoma and things for Texas.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I should also ask because the Adelaide music scene it is quite vibrant as well. Are there any specific, I guess, locations in terms of say clubs in Adelaide that you would recommend? I'm not turning this into a travel podcast, but for anyone listening who might be interested in knowing the Adelaide nightlife, is there anywhere you could recommend?
Well, yeah, I DJ at a place called Crybaby every Friday, which is a really super fun party that's just like an American dive bar. So that's a fun night. And then Sugar is the probably one of the few clubs in Adelaide that gets the international guests like your Marcellus Pittman and Moody Man and that type of thing. So Sugar and Crybaby is really good, but there's so much. Memphis Slims does a really cool blues kind of jazz
Mhm.
night as well. Oh, every night there is it's a jazz and blues bar.
Yeah, it's a
Um,
that's a yeah. Memphis Slims is a great place. They actually, the last time I was in Adelaide, I was there because a friend of mine had sort of an event there, and I just thought this is such a good place. I just love the vibe, and of course, Sugar is another great example of a great place in Adelaide.
yeah,
It's wonderful.
great vibe. It's focused on the music. Both of those places, music
Yeah.
first.
And yeah, I am really aware where I'm turning this into an Adelaide, the place to be sort of podcast. But that's just the way people from Adelaide tend to talk. I noticed. But turning back to your music, of course, there are so many other projects along the way in your career. Like you've got like things like Favored Nations, like Tone Brigade, Holy Models, and there's so much I could be looking at. But
Yeah,
for you, what is it like to work in these different projects all the time? Are you someone who adapts your style of production at all, or is it sort of more that your unfiltered self is often complemented by the addition of others that you may work with?
it's definitely nice to change the energy in the studio. So when I'm sitting working in the studio on my own, I'm driven by my own, I guess, drive, and I'm reminiscing of, oh, when I played at Fabric in London, I'm trying to capture that vibe in that moment and have a good time in the studio and create that music. As soon as you put another person in, it changes what anything that I would ever make on my own, So it's nice to kind of brainstorm, hey, we should do something like this. Then we get together, we get in the studio and work, or even if it's just a challenge, like, Mark's in LA, I'm in Adelaide. So if we have a conversation and then even though I'm on my own, but I walk into the studio with a project in mind, like, okay, I'm going to try to do my best at capturing this kind of sound.
Mm,
Uh, it's really nice. And it also is very freeing in the fact that when you work with other people, you don't necessarily have to finish it. Like when I'm on my own, it's just like, okay, I'm starting, and at some point, I'm going to finish this song.
mm,
Whereas when you're collaborating with people, sometimes you can take more chances and be like, okay, I'm gonna do this thing that I like that I'm not sure about, but let's see what Mark thinks about it, or like let's see what Morgan if he'll be happy to sing over this part. And it really drives a song in a whole new direction that you wouldn't take it on your own, which is a nice feeling.
mm.
And it surprises you when it comes back. You're like, oh my God, this is really good.
See,
So that,
I actually almost would have thought it would have been the other way around. That if you're sort of doing things solo, you're probably more inclined not to finish things because you're your own worst critic. But if you're working with other people, it might sort of almost feel like you have an obligation to sort of say, "All right, we're all in this together. We have to see it through to completion." But
yeah.
it is nice to hear that sort of other um, other side of the equation, I guess.
I think, I don't think I'm the best producer or know how to do work the programs the best. I just kind of hit stuff until it sounds good. But one thing I did learn at an early age is that music does you no good sitting on your hard drive in your iTunes library. Like
Yeah.
when I work, like, sometimes I go in the studio and it's nothing good is happening and I'll quit, but if I go in the studio at 9 p.m. and things are working, I'll just stay in the studio till 5 in the morning and try to get as much done of the song as I can while I'm in the zone.
Yeah, totally.
So I finish a lot of music and I always kind of force myself to finish it because you're always chasing that lightning in the bottle. When it's going good, I'm in here. I'm not leaving.
Yeah. And I guess also when you're actually sort of working on different projects as well, like you sort of touched on it a little bit before, but do you often sort of go into a new project or any sort of thing with a sound in mind, or is it more a case of, if you were collaborating with other people, such as Morgan, for example, are you going into that thinking, okay, this is the sound I want to achieve, or if you're working sort of by yourself under a different name, do you sort of think, oh, okay, I've come up with this sound, so I'm going to put this under a different name? Is there a sort of a hard and fast rule that you follow in that sense?
I don't think there's any sort of rule on it because, even with favored nations, the music has got a bed, like it's got a sound, but
Mm.
it's not all around the same. There's some slow songs, there's some kind of rock songs, and I think that I go in trying to push myself creatively, and maybe I'm focused more on where the song is going to end up
Mhm.
more than how I'm in the process of writing it, right? So like if I come in here and I say, right, I want to make some music for a really good, interesting house label, well then I'm trying to make something that I think will work in a good club, you know?
Totally. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what I would play in smart if I was going to DJ in Smart Bar tonight and I wanted to play my new song, let's make this that I think will work. And then I start at that point and try to capture that. And when I think about, oh, I'm going to work with Morgan or I'm going to have this song, I'm going to feature Josh Pike on this song, I know what, I want to try to capture as an end result. So I kind of fumble my way through trying to get some sort of sound that I'm happy with that I think would complement them.
Yeah, actually, that makes complete sense because I mean I'm also a musician myself who dabbles with terrible production, but I'm largely a guitarist in a band and everything. But in addition
Yeah.
to that, I'm thinking of it from the music journalist point of view, which is how I make money, and I'm thinking of it from that sort of point of view where I'm sort of like, all right, if you have a point that you want to make, you have to actually sort of make sure the lead up makes sense. It's sort of like if you want to be dropping a song, you have to make sure whatever precedes it is going to actually be right for the vibe and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's always fascinating to hear how others work in this sense, and to hear that from yourself. I feel like I'm rambling now, really.
So how would you
um,
you'd be like, how would Rolling Stone review this? How would Pitchfork review this? Like where would this land in the world of music?
exactly, and of course, and as someone who used to work for Rolling Stone, I have had that question asked. I have asked myself that question so many times. Um, But I guess as well, we're now in a little bit of a full circle moment for yourself because you've got this other project currently with Modern Living, which is you and Mark, so who is
Yeah.
also from Greenskeepers. So how did this project come about? How did you and Mark decide to work together as Modern Living as opposed to working under the name Greenskeepers in whatever form it may take?
Well, I really ran Greenskeepers into the ground. Like we toured that band so much. We were traveling 4 days a week, and there was four of us, and it was really grinding. And I was just entering in my 30s when we were kind of starting to get worn out. So Mark moved to LA, uh, and he's got a great career in advertising and doing music for advertising and graphic design and stuff. And Coben moved to a farm. He was the bass player. He moved to a farm in Kansas City, and Nick moved where his wife was from in Germany, in Heidelberg, to do a career in IT.
Right.
And I moved to Adelaide to be with my wife because this is where she's originally from. So we all kind of just kind of went our own ways at the end of Greenskeepers. Um, and Mark was Nick and Coben didn't do music anymore. Mark still did it, but in more of a corporate sense. And then I was still grinding away, but more focused on just solo, just as my name, just James Curd songs.
Mhm.
And actually, over COVID, Mark and I had a lot of time in our hands. Like I was just in the studio nonstop, and he, had less work that he needed to get done all the time. So we would kind of be in the studio and FaceTime each other and just talk about music that we were currently liking. And, you know, Greenskeepers kind of fell together haphazardly, where Modern Living, we took a long time sending each other music back and forth and trying to decide like what we wanted to do with it, what we wanted to like represent for us. And so I feel like this is definitely an even better representation of what we want to do compared to what Greenskeepers was. And so yeah, we started working a couple years ago, and you and I just touched on how most of my work and everything is overseas, and I'm not really part of an Australian musical communities, especially in Adelaide, but in Australia in general.
Mm.
So I really wanted to use Modern Living as a facilitator to working and featuring the talent in Australia so I could kind of be more connected to what's happening here. So I don't have to sit on a plane for 27 hours all the time to do anything. So
Mm.
I really focused on every song has a feature, and 75% of the features are Australian.
I do want to actually just touch on that one sec, but one question I guess I do have just again on the Greenskeepers front. I guess when did Greenskeepers actually officially sort of finish? I guess because I mean, there's obviously still been there's been music released under the Greenskeepers name until what 2021 or so. There was like the Nothing in Common record that came out. Like,
Yes.
like
So
yeah.
Greenskeepers, uh, before me and Mark got back together and created Modern Living, I still use Greenskeepers the name as a outlet to release music that I felt didn't fit James Curd, or which I felt I worked with other artists and collaborated on things that just didn't fit in any box that they were doing or what I was doing,
That
you
makes
know?
sense. Yeah.
So it
Sort
was
of
just
just
kinda
sort of
like
like that little catch-all sort of project off to the side in a sense then.
exactly like the whole thing of it's doing nothing, nobody any good on my hard drive or on iTunes. So let me put this out in the world. I like the song. It's cool, and it didn't fit Favorite Nations. There's some Greenskeeper songs that Morgan is on, and it just didn't fit for Favorite Nations properly. But I still liked the song and didn't want it to do not be in the world. So it was a nice outlet, and there still might be some stuff because Greenskeepers also did like a little swing house and stuff like
Hmm.
that. So there might be who knows what will happen in the studio. So there might be a song that pops up and be like, let's just do this as Greenskeepers, actually.
So basically, what I'm hearing is Greenskeepers is eternal as long as you're making music. Really,
Yeah,
it'll
definitely.
exist in some capacity. Really.
Greenskeepers will never die.
But back to the modern living front as well. You've been working with so many amazing artists, like the likes of Nick Littlemore. There's Geordie James of San Cisco, Josh Pike. I'm sure there's so many that I'm forgetting. There's like Nathan Ball, like drama. There's so many
Yeah.
great names. Um, so but it's also got this real sort of full circle vibe to you. It's got this classic Chicago style house mixed, Chicago style house sound mixed with this fresh new generation in a way, and especially with a lot of Australian acts as well. So, for you, what has the reception to it been like? Has it been enjoyable for you as well to other people?
I think that the last thing that we did with drama is already hitting like 300,000 plays, and it hasn't been out on a month for a month yet. And you know, our idea is that we want to work with all these amazing people to kind of get our to introduce ourselves to an audience. And so for me, it's some of the most music that I'm most proud of because we're working with all these really talented artists, and it's also got like a strategy to get in front of people to be heard. It's not just oh, I want to make 300 vinyl copies of this and it'll be this underground kind of thing that only a few people will know about. This is an actual project that we hope gets on the radar, you know?
Yeah, of course. And was I right in hearing there's an EP on the way, or what's the current process? Because there's been a lot of singles, obviously.
Yeah, so the plan is it's something called a waterfall release plan, which is basically, Mark and I have almost 20 songs done, and we're making music all the time right now. And basically, every 6 weeks, we're going to put out a new song for
Right.
like the next few years, hopefully.
Yeah, awesome. So there's always something to look forward to, really.
Yeah. And it keeps it exciting for us too. It's so nice
Mm.
to see I'm here. I am speaking with you because of the next record coming out. It's just nice that we always have some momentum to be like, we worked, it came out good, we released it, and it's, getting on the radar. And now time to put our head down and make sure that the next one gets some shine.
Well, as long as you're enjoying it and speaking to people like me, then that's all that matters, isn't it? That's
Yeah, totally.
amazing. Well, I feel like we should get down to the portion of the podcast from which its namesake is derived. So, I guess for the listeners out there and for yourself as well, Trusty Chord sees me follow this 1, 3, and 5 structure of a standard chord. And I ask you about one artist has impacted you, 3 albums that have influenced you, and maybe 5 songs you can always turn to as well. These albums and songs don't need to be by your one artist as well. And it's a very wordy explanation, but I'm doing my best to make it happen. But I guess my first question for you here, James, is who is one artist that's inspired you the most in your life, whether it be personally or creatively?
These are really difficult questions.
Everyone says the same thing
I
every
bet everyone
time.
gets pretty stuck on this one.
Oh, the amount of editing I have to do on these podcasts is taking out all the ums and the ahs and everything.
It's so tough, right? Because you know, if I was talking about house music and my life as a DJ and creating music for a club, I'd say Derek Carter.
Mm.
And but if I'm talking about me sitting down trying to make proper songs with chords and structure and interesting, I'd say ELO, Electric Light Orchestra.
Right. Okay. And of course, I mean, the beauty of this podcast is that we aren't following hard and fast rules. You can easily have 2 artists like that. So we can easily say ELO and Derek Carter as well there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, actually, that is, it's fascinating to hear. You mentioned ELO because that, like, to me, ELO isn't an artist I would have actually sort of associated with your sort of style of music, or at least where you're
Yeah.
coming from a musical point of view. But I guess you're really you're taking something out of what they've been putting down that really resonates.
Their music is like a math problem. Like it's really complicated and hard to get your head around. And I feel like some of, a lot of what Favored Nations is and some of even what Modern Living is my attempt to reach that level of musicianship and not come anywhere close. So
I'm
I
sure you'll
am,
get there one day.
you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah, totally.
it's like all my songs are cover songs of what those songs ended up being, but nobody knows mine's a cover song because I missed it by so much.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. But I mean, that's also the beauty of it as well. Like one of the things I do is I also teach or I lecture at basically a TAFE, and
Oh,
I'm teaching students how to sort of market themselves and how to write from a professional point of view. And something I've sort of said in the past, I've sort of said like, what you can always do is think about who inspires you. Like I've said to them, if you're looking for ways to describe your own music, think about who inspires you. And then think about how you would describe them. So you could very easily sort of say like, oh yeah, the James Curd sound, much like ELO. And you're just sort of like, well, that could be what you're aiming for. People won't see it, but that's the inspiration right there. And yeah, that's it's fascinating to hear. And I feel like I'm rambling once again. I tend to do that sometimes.
no, this is fun.
Yeah. So my next question for you is, what are the 3 albums that have impacted you the most? This could be albums that you're always throwing on, or something that was integral to your musical evolution.
All right, so it's funny because the thought of albums nowadays is so different, right?
It's so different. Yeah.
You can't, there's not many times that you can just put an album on and listen to it compared to I'm gonna create my own Spotify playlist and listen to that, right? With
Yeah, exactly. Which is, I guess, also part of the reason why I've always found compilations have been something that have resonated with me a lot, and maybe that could be why I'm sort of very suited for this playlist generation these days as well.
um, so early on, an album that I could listen to from start to finish, it would probably be like Midnight Marauders, Tribe Called Quest. I can still put that on and just like, man, this is like so good. It's so clever. The lyricist is amazing. The music is great. So I'd say Midnight Marauders is one, and that was kind of during the tail end of transitioning from skateboard world to musical rave loft party world.
I mean, I definitely feel like a Tribe Called Quest were a little bit of a gateway drug for a lot of people as well.
Yeah.
Like, even if you were into like, skate or punk or something, there was almost like this, it was almost like they sort of gave people permission to sort of try out these new genres. And yeah, I guess it almost sounds like you might have been one of those people as well.
So my answer isn't original. Someone else has put up Tribe Called Quest.
Oh no, 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 not at all. I'm just saying.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, I actually don't
That's
think
awesome.
I don't think anyone's picked a Tribe Called Quest before.
Um,
But I mean, hey, you feel free to pick anything that anyone else has chosen, of course.
what else? The next into like, moving into creating my own music and what Greenskeepers kind of was, I'd say that I was really inspired by Air. Like that Moon Safari record
Mm,
is so good.
oh, absolutely. It's a yeah. I was actually listening to it only just last week, actually, and for me, just hearing the intro to "Sexy Boy,"
Yeah.
it's transportational. It's actually
So
this
good.
totally different place.
And I think it's there a lot of my, you know, big reason for my synth collection addiction, like they
Mm.
kind of kicked that off when you saw what they were working with. And
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a little bit of like if you're a music fan, looking at their setup is like a Toys R Us sort of thing, isn't
yeah, man,
it?
it's so good.
And we have one album left.
Last, I would actually say just because, um, the third act of my career has really been film scoring. And I'd say Eternal Sunshine, like John Bryan's music for Eternal Sunshine and the Spotless Mind is really inspiring. And there's not a song on there I don't like. And his musicianship and how he captures like emotion that songs feel like they could be score, but they're also just can stand alone as a song itself.
Hmm.
Uh, I love John Bryan.
Yeah, he's definitely a very great sort of composer in that sense because I remember that was something that really stuck with me when I listened to that movie for the first time. Oh, sorry, when I watched that movie. Sorry, I was listening to it as well. That's
Yeah,
how movies work.
yeah.
But yeah, I just remember it sort of being. I remember thinking like, wow, this is actually really impressive. The way that music has this ability to actually further the narrative and what you're feeling as well. And he's done so many amazing soundtracks as well.
It's so good. And it's just one of those things where you can put his song in as an instrumental and it feels like a perfect piece for score. And you could take the song out and give it to, or I don't know if he sings. Does he sing? Um,
I'm
I
not too
think so. But,
sure.
you
And
can pull that piece of score out and have someone sing on it, and now all of a sudden it's gave it a whole new life of a piece of music. So it's like, yeah, he's really good at making some sort of emotional score sounding songs.
And he also does a very good job of making some movies watchable because I remember, not exactly liking I Heart Huckabees, but the
Yeah,
soundtrack that really helped.
song
Um,
was yeah, that movie's yeah, that music is great.
yeah, but the movie, I don't know, could be a controversial take, but not a huge fan of the movie.
Yeah.
I guess moving on though, my last question for you is five songs that you can always turn to, whether it be for comfort, for excitement, anything at all. Your five trusty songs, and of course, I'm aware that asking for five songs is a bit of a lofty task, but
Well, I'll go with Electric Light Orchestra, Mr. Blue Sky.
oh yes.
Fun is definitely one. How about I'll do Little Louis French Kiss. Now this is tough, boss.
That's what I'm here for. I'm all about asking the hard questions and getting the best out of all those musicians out there.
I'll do Palehead. I Will Refuse.
Oh yes,
You know this?
I do know this one. Yes, Palehead. They're wonderful. I mean, I say wonderful, but I mean wonderful isn't sort of the word that comes to mind when I think of Palehead. But a great artist. I mean, I mean,
How did you learn about them? That's kind of a really small.
I think for me, it's that I was a huge fan of Ministry, and
Yeah.
also loving, Minor Threat and bands like that, sort of, getting into like Ian MacKaye, Al Jorgensen and everything. And then you start sort of going further along and you start thinking, okay, there's so much more to discover. But yeah, it's just hearing this sort of collaboration between these artists. It's amazing, honestly. Plus, I think I remember hearing at one point, I think I Will Refuse was used in like an episode of Cold Case or something like that. And I can just imagine all of these sort of like, middle-aged sort of people just at home on like a Tuesday night watching Cold Case and being like, oh, I really like this song, something like that.
I just got such strong memories to that of being in a skate park and when that came on, you just kind of pushed a little harder and ollied a little higher. It just got you. It was so fun.
Totally. I mean, to be perfectly fair, that's exactly how the music of, Al Jorgensen or Ian MacKaye does for me anyway, Palehead or
Yeah.
not.
For another house song, I'll say Shade Amir. Forever Mona. How many is that? How many I got
That's
left?
4. You got 1 left.
One left. I'll take the Smiths, This Charming Man.
That's a wonderful song. I'm really enjoying this nice little group of 5 that you picked here. It's nice and diverse as well. Going from the Smiths, Palehead, ELO, and all these sort of things.
Come to Cry Baby.
Yeah, exactly. Like
What I'm doing.
music's all about letting you feel something, whether it's getting amped up at the skate park or crying on the
Yeah.
bathroom floor or hearing Morrissey, and his howling lyrics or something like that. But no, this is some really great choices
Bell
you've
and
got here.
Sebastian, I Want the World to Stop. I think that's the best bass line I've ever heard.
Yeah. Which album was that one from? I'm trying to think of it now. It's totally
The
fine
Bell
if you
and
don't know.
Sebastian one?
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
Hey, look, I got Spotify. Right About Love.
Ah, okay, right.
So
Yeah,
2000.
yeah, right. Okay. Another wonderful band. I'm just really complimenting everything you're saying today, aren't I?
You know that song, that I Want the World to Stop?
I do, yes. Yeah, I'm also a Bell and Sebastian fan. I mean, I'm such a music nerd. I just know so many bands, and I just always listen to them, and like
Well, if
because
you know
I'd
Pale,
endeavor. Yeah. Oh man,
this.
I'd be doing a terrible job if I didn't know Bell and Sebastian if I know Palehead. I mean, I think they're contemporaries, aren't they?
Another band that's in that Palehead is a bit more contemporary, like modern, is The Shoes, Time to Dance. Do you know that song?
I don't. I think I've heard of the Shoes, but I can't say I've heard of the song though.
Dude, you should watch The Shoes, Time to Dance, and watch the music video. Don't just listen to it on Spotify, because the music video has Jake Gyllenhaal in it as like a
Oh,
serial.
okay.
So it's so good.
The role he was born to play.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So,
Amazing. Well, I feel like I should actually, say thank you, James, so very much for your time today and for being part of the Trusty Chords podcast. I hugely appreciate it.
so good. I really appreciate having being able to be on here. You having me.
Thank you for listening to Trusty Chords. If you listened to this episode and enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate if you were able to take a few moments to like, follow, share, and review this podcast on your preferred platform of choice. As always, no obligation, but I'm forever grateful if you do. As always, I'm over on Instagram and Facebook at Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word. I've also got a blog on my website, which is tylerjenke.com. That's tylerjenke/Trusty Chords Podcast, all one word. You know by now what you can find on the site, but you can also find a link to the Buy Me a Coffee platform where you can throw me a few dollars to keep this podcast running, if you feel so inclined. Lastly, I need to thank James Curd for spending time with me this week for the podcast, and I also need to thank Dean from Habit for helping organise this chat as well. But once again, thank you kindly for listening, and I hope to see you all again next week as I continue to celebrate music and those that create it.